Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. If you don't know who I am, I'm Athena Motava. I'm a legislative representative at Earth Justice. I'm based in the DC office and I work on a transportation portfolio that includes clean ports. So I wanted to welcome you all to this webinar that's highlighting EPA's Clean Ports program, and especially the community engagement piece of it. This webinar is being held by a coalition of NGOs working to ensure that the port's proposals achieve emissions reductions and are supported by community groups, which is a really key piece. We'll talk a little bit more about what ports and we will talk a little bit more about the Clean Ports program and what it entails, and also defining what ports are according to EPA. I also wanted to just start off talking about one of our key partners, Andrea Vidare, who is a organizer from People's Collective for Environmental Justice. Just yesterday, she was awarded the 2024 North American Goldman Prize recipient award for her work significantly limiting trucking and rail emissions to substantially improve air quality for millions of Californians, while also accelerating the country's transition to zero-emission vehicles. She can't be at this webinar today, but I really wanted to highlight her work. So I will include some stories about her throughout the webinar. Next slide. Okay, so for today's agenda, as I said, we'll be talking about what ports are as defined by EPA for this specific program. We'll go over the benefits of cleaning up ports and also why the community engagement piece is really important. We'll talk about, we'll hear from our environmental justice partners, and then we'll wrap up with some takeaways and next steps. And if there's time at the end, we will do a Q&A with our partners, but there will also be our contacts linked at the end in case any of you want to contact us directly. Next slide. Okay, so how are ports defined according to EPA's Clean Ports program? So this is really helpful to just make sure we're all on the same page on what EPA is defining as a port. I'm going to start off talking about water ports first, because that's typically what people picture when we mention ports. So I'll start with those. Next slide. Okay, so these definitions are straight from EPA's website on the Clean Ports program, which I highly recommend checking out if you have not already. Basically, a water port is a place alongside water that you can traverse, and it could be like sea, lakes, rivers, that also has one or more facilities close by to unload or load passengers or cargoes from ships, ferries, and other commercial vessels. Fishing is also included in this. For EPA's purposes, a small water port has less than 8 million tons of cargo on average annually from the last 3 calendar years of Army Corps data. And that information can be found on the EPA website, and we're happy to include that in our follow-up resources for you all. And we specifically flag what small water ports are because there's a carve-out for small water ports, which I'll talk about later. It might be helpful if you're trying to figure out if your district has a small water port by actually looking at EPA's list of large water ports and seeing if it's in that list. And if it is, then it does not qualify as a small water port. But that list is available at EPA's Clean Ports program website. And again, that distinction is important just because of EPA's prioritization criteria. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to move on to dry ports. So this is defined by EPA as an intermodal truck rail facility that's included in the 2024 Federal Highway Administration's intermodal connector database with either more than 50,000 20-foot equivalent units per year or 100 trucks per day, or makes up more than 20% of freight volumes handled by any mode within a state. EPA has a specific list of what these eligible program or eligible sites are. So you can check out EPA's list of resources, which again, we're happy to include in our follow-up. And we also wanted to make sure that we are highlighting the dry ports specifically because this is another area where EPA carves out a special a special amount for dry ports specifically, and a lot of that has been done because of the advocacy of environmental justice communities across the US. As I mentioned, Andrea Verdare earlier is one of those folks that did a lot of work to really include inland ports to be able to get this money. She's from the California's Inland Empire, which consists of Riverside and San Bernardino counties, which are both east of Los Angeles, and they're home to more than 4 million people, the majority of whom are Latino. The region also has the worst air quality in the country, and specifically where Andrea lives, it has become the country's largest trucking hub because of next day shipping booms and the region's proximity to the nation's largest shipping complex, such as container ports like Long Beach and San Pedro. There's over 1 billion square feet of warehousing, large intermodal rail yards, and multiple freight airports, and about 600,000 daily truck trips conducted in the area. And combined with rail emissions, it produces about 25,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So just to paint you a picture of what we're talking about. Next slide. So unfortunately, Andrea's story is not unique. Over a decade ago, EPA recognized that more than 13 million people, about 3.5 million of whom are children, live near major marine and inland ports or rail yards, and that these individuals are disproportionately low-income communities of color and are more likely to be affected by increased health risks from air pollution. The global freight transportation system is one of the largest sources of pollution from across the country. Freight transportation relies on thousands of diesel trucks, locomotives, cargo handling equipment, and ships aimed at moving huge volumes of goods from places of manufacturing to distribution warehouses to places of consumption. So this system contributes to significant amounts of localized pollution in areas that are already overburdened by other sources of pollution. In 2023, EPA found that 10% of US vehicles were medium and heavy duty vehicles. However, they actually accounted for 25% of greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector. So they play an outsized role. And this contributes to an ongoing health crisis in the environmental justice communities and the climate crisis across the globe. And therefore, it's really important to include communities in decision making when looking at reducing emissions. And I'll also, just mention it's a really great local job creator. And while the cost of zero emission vehicles are higher up front than internal combustion engines and their counterparts, their lifetime total costs are actually lower in many cases today because of the lack of repairs when it comes to things like oil changes and whatnot. Next slide. So I wanted to do a poll very quickly to get a sense of the folks that are on the call. If you have had, or if you know about your port in your district, and if they have applied for this program at all, if they are planning to, just to get a sense of where offices are. I'm sure we'll get a plethora of responses. Okay. I think we've slowed down on the responses, so I'm gonna I won't share the responses, but I'll just say a majority of folks are not sure, which is great. That means you're at the right webinar. And also, if you do know that your port is applying, this is also a really great webinar to just think about what other outreach is necessary. Next slide. Okay. So now we're going to go into EPA's Clean Ports program very briefly. It's a really detailed program, so I'm going to flag at the top, as I have in my earlier slides, that EPA has a really great Clean Ports program website that has a lot of resources. There's also a list of frequently asked questions, but I'm just going to give you a very general overview about this program to be helpful. So just for context, this program was created in 2022 through the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. And it has just opened up applications February 28th of this year. So this is a very new program, and we'll get a little bit into key dates to know. Next slide. So the goals of EPA's Clean Ports program is pretty straightforward. EPA wants to help the port sector transition to a zero-emission future, reduce air pollution in environmental justice communities, and ensure meaningful community engagement is a standard industry practice. So now that we know what EPA's goals are for this program, let's see how they plan to achieve this. Okay, so EPA is providing $3 billion to fund zero-emission port equipment and infrastructure and climate and air quality planning at ports. So there's two sub-programs. The first is Technology Deployment Competition Program. That includes about $2.8 billion of that funding to zero-emission technology, and that can include cargo handling equipment, drayage trucks, harbor craft and other vessels, charging infrastructure, shore power for marine vessels, and that's just some of the things that qualify. Again, highly recommend checking out EPA's detailed list of what would qualify under this program. The second is the planning competition, and this includes about $150 million to support activities that include but aren't limited to things like public engagement, anything from strategy analysis, safety planning, workforce training, project management, infrastructure testing, would all fall into that program. Next slide. Okay, so who should apply to this program? So the eligible applicants includes a port authority, a state, regional, local, or tribal agency that has jurisdiction over a port authority or port, an air pollution control agency, or a private entity that applies in partnership with one of the eligible entities and owns, operates, or uses related technology at ports. There can be multiple applicants on the same application. And I actually really recommend EPA's most recent webinar on this, specifically about frequently asked questions, which really goes over this piece in detail, because they've been getting a lot of questions about it. And I also wanted to highlight community groups and local nonprofits are eligible for pass-through funding so long as they move quickly to partner with a statutory partner. So just wanted to flag that at the top. And then in terms of prioritized entities, so as I mentioned earlier, there are certain entities that have a special carve out. I just realized I forgot to put the one for non-attainment. I think it's about 400 million. But the ones specifically for dry ports, there's a maximum of 250 million total that can be applied for technology projects. For small water ports, there's at least 250 million for zero emission technology projects, and at least 10 planning projects at small water ports. So that's one of the reasons why we really want to make sure folks are applying, because that they really are prioritizing those folks. EPA is also hoping to prioritize applicants in disadvantaged communities. Again, EPA has a specific list of what communities fall under this that we're happy to share with you all. EPA also announced that at least 2 technology projects and at least 2 planning projects will be awarded in tribal agencies as well. Next slide. Okay, so key dates. So we really want to emphasize that applications for this program ends May 28th, which is in less than a month. And an applicant must start their application about 10 days before it's due, just to have enough time to fill it out. EPA talks about this in their frequently asked questions. If there are any pertinent questions, I would email EPA by May 6th. That is their deadline for having questions answered. So again, May 6th is the deadline for asking EPA any types of questions. So I'll also emphasize that selectees will be notified sometime in August or September, with grants being awarded by December. So this is a very quick turnaround for this program. From my understanding, this will only be one round, so it's one and done. But I'll also emphasize at the end, there's a lot of similar programs that will also benefit ports, but this is one that we just wanted to highlight today. Okay, so now next slide. So I get to stop talking, and we can hear from our environmental justice partners. I'm going to introduce our first guest, which is Shakina Reeves from Harambe House, so excited to hear from you.
Thank you for your time. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shakina Reeves, and I am the environmental organizer here at the Harambe House. The Harambe House is a civil justice organization that's been serving the community of Savannah, the state of Georgia, internationally known for over the past 30 years. We are a tool to our community where our community members know they could come to us to gain resources as well as gain contact to decision makers to help uplift them and build capacity where they are whole, healthy, and prosperous. Today, we actually had the opportunity where we did a port tour at the Georgia Port Authority. Myself, along with 29 other individuals with a mix of community leaders, community association presidents, as well as some of our workforce development students. That's a program that we run here at the Harambe House. It was so important for me to get us in the door at the table with the Georgia Port Authority, because I had previously spoken with Ms. Joanne Caldwell, who is the director of risk management and sustainability at the Georgia Port Authority, and she shared that they were planning on applying for dollars under the infrastructure program, but however, they weren't planning on applying for any planning dollars. I was very saddened to hear this information, but she went on to share that about 2 years ago, EPA approved for them to do some purple air monitoring. So although it's been 2 years in the planning, they actually just started to implement this plan in December of 2023. I would like to read some stats that the Georgia Port Authority have on their website. So according to Georgia Port Authority, for the fiscal year of 2022, they were about at 140 billion in sales, which is 12% of Georgia's total sales. They added 59 billion to the state's GDP, which is 9% of Georgia's total GDP. They also had an income of 33 billion, which is 6% of Georgia's total personal income, as well as 7.4 billion in federal taxes, 2 billion in state taxes, and 1.8 in local taxes. So with all the revenue and things that the Georgia Port Authority is gaining, they only saw fit for us when it came to the action plan they have in place was to apply for 9 purple air monitors and 12 black carbon monitors. And we don't think that's simply enough. We do understand that we do need the data from the air quality, especially with this expansion that they're having, but they don't like to use the word expansion. They like to use revitalization. But we know an increase in your production is also going to increase our pollution rates. And we also don't need the data to know that people in our community are constantly dying from cancer, different chronic issues. Georgia, Savannah actually per se has one of the highest low birth rates in the state of Georgia. We also are seeing a large increase of rate of youth receiving dementia and just early health chronic issues. So it is our hopes that after the conversation today and definitely after this webinar as well, that the Georgia Port Authority will reconsider their idea of not moving backwards. We don't think it's moving backwards. We want them to innovate their current plan. We want them to amend their current plan and add simple things such as workforce development. They have a beautiful program, a YES program that's for high school students graduating high school and wanting to enter the workforce. However, they currently don't have anything in place for those adults who would like to enter this workforce, but possibly don't have the experience needed. That's something that the planning dollars can help us advocate for, as well as education around purple air monitors. Yeah, we have these monitors, but if the citizens don't know how to read it, we're not really doing them justice as well. A lot of citizens also asked today for indoor monitoring. We have an issue with the smell of pollution around us, so we would like things such as air scrubbers. You know, these are things that we could be intentional about helping to make life better for our citizens here in Savannah. We're tired of being sick or tired. We're tired of dying. We're tired of having to work for low-paying jobs. We're tired of having to relocate from our communities because of gentrification. So many people are moving to Savannah for the opportunities that Savannah has, but many of the residents in Savannah are being looked over. So here's the opportunity for Georgia Port Authority to be intentional about the way that they work alongside these frontline communities. We also would like to see Georgia Port Authority form a community advisory board, therefore that all community leaders can be at the table at one time. Because right now the mechanism that they have is a very solo thing. They want to talk to one community over here, one community over there, and it's kind of almost like a divide and conquer type thing, or you just want to do things to check off the box. Today, Ms. Joanne, in the midst of myself and the rest of the group, said that they're not going back. They're not moving backwards. And I don't understand, out of all the economic increase that the Georgia Port is bringing to you, why don't you see fit for to do more for the citizens of Savannah, especially when we have organizations who are willing to work alongside your grant writers to show them like, hey, this is how you can just add value to what you already have. You don't have to trash it, especially since you guys are just really starting to implement it. You only have about 2 months worth of data to really go by. So we're really asking for Georgia Port Authority to be a better community member when it comes to just being intentional about bringing the communities together and really allow the community members to be the experts to the things that they need. We don't have to wait 14 months to know that people are dying. You could just go to the hospital and say, well, how many people did you die this month with asthma? How many people died with a heart attack? How many people died with a stroke? We want them to be intentional about really making a difference versus just checking a box off. So I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation. I'm looking forward to also learning what other communities are doing so that anything that we can do to try to help uplift and build the capacity of our members. Our end goal is for them to be whole, healthy, and prosperous. And it's so hard when you have these things in your neighborhoods that you have no control over. So thank you for your time today, and I look forward to discussing more.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that insightful presentation. I really appreciate it. So next we are going to talk a little bit about inland ports. I'd like to introduce Jose Acosta from Little Village Environmental Justice Organization to talk about his experience.
Thank you, Athena, and hello, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. As Athena said, I'm Jose Acosta. I'm the Transportation Justice Program Manager at El Vejo, and I manage our mobility justice work. I'm also the co-chair of the Transportation Equity Network here locally in Chicago. I'm also on the side, am a PhD candidate in geography and GIS at the University of Illinois. So I'm gonna chat with you all today about what we're dealing with in Chicago and the importance and urgency of decarbonizing our freight sector. Next slide, please. Um, so Little Village, the neighborhood that we're based in, it's a community on the southwest side of the city. It's predominantly a Mexican community, and actually is the largest Mexican neighborhood in the Midwest. Has a vibrant commercial corridor that generates the second most sales tax revenue of any other corridor in the city. However, it's also one with a lot of environmental justice issues. This is due to its history as an industrial community. The neighborhood grew around industry, initially attracted German, Czech, and Polish immigrants. It became Mexican during the 1970s. As you can see in the image, industry continues to account for a significant portion of the total land. We actually have an official industrial corridor, one of 2024 in the city, and it actually makes up about 43% of the total area in the community. So, major part of our everyday lives. And really, this is because of our geography. We're located directly north of the Sanitary and Ship Canal, which is an industrial canal that was initially constructed in 1848 as the Illinois and Michigan Canal. And that was the construction of this canal was actually really critical to the city's initial growth. This is because it connected the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River and made it possible to take ships inland between the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a really critical part of our history. We're also adjacent to the I-55, which is one of the busiest freight corridors in the country. And most notably, you can see we're sandwiched between three rail yards, two of which are owned by BNSF, and one of which is owned by Union Pacific. As you can see, the rail yards are surrounded by warehouses and distribution centers, one of which is the largest warehouse within the city, a 1.3 million square foot distribution center that's leased by Target and was at the center of a big fight that we had over the last few years. So these, along with many other industrial facilities, this is the reason why Little Village has so much diesel particulate matter and particulate matter in general. Next slide, please. And this is what these rail yards look like. This is Corwith, the BNSF facility that's directly south of Little Village. This is actually the largest rail yard within city limits, and at one point was the largest rail yard in the world when it was constructed in 1888. Currently, it's the second largest intermodal rail yard in the metro area, and in 2022, it actually had 820 over just a little bit over 823,000 lifts, which equals about 1.85 million containers. So just for context, we're at this dry port alone. Oh, and also I kind of use dry port, intermodal rail yard, inland port interchangeably, given the EPA's definition. But so this dry port alone moved more containers than the port of Miami and would be the ninth busiest port in the country if it was included in port rankings. Of course, this doesn't happen because dry ports aren't included, and this is why we advocated so hard to the EPA to include them in the Clean Ports funding, right? Because we have so many containers coming through here. So the Corwith alone attracts nearly 3,000 trucks a day. So both the trains and the trucks, of course, are creating a lot of air pollution in the adjacent community. So, and in the map or in the image, you can also see how residential areas are literally outside the fences, right? There's also parks, schools, commercial areas. So these rail yards are really everyday life for many folks throughout the region. And next slide, please. So Corwith is just one example. Chicago is the freight hub of North America. We have more rail infrastructure than any other city. It's the only place where all 6 Class 1 railroads converge, all of whom operate a handful of intermodal rail yards. There's approximately 25% of all freight trains and 50% of all intermodal trains pass through Chicago every year. In the entire metro area, there are 19 of these dry ports, 8 of which are located in the city. So combined, they actually moved about 17.9 million containers in 2018. This was actually the highest number ever recorded for the rail yards. And most recently, in 2022, which is the most recent updated numbers that we have, there was 16.5 million containers that passed through these 19 ports. So when you account for total container volume, Chicago is actually the second busiest port city in the country after the combined ports of LA and Long Beach. It would also be the 11th busiest in the world and actually move more containers than the port of Rotterdam, which is the busiest container port in Europe. Yet, right, we're not viewed as a traditional port, as was mentioned earlier. Right, obviously there aren't the cargo ships and all the issues associated with shipping. However, in terms of the impacts on the community, the similarities are there. According to the California Air Resources Board, emissions from one rail car is equivalent to 400 semi-trucks, and we have more rail cars than any other city. We have 19 port-adjacent communities, the vast majority of which are people of color. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see these maps that show that. So we actually made these maps because we wanted to show, right, how it's primarily communities of color that are impacted by these dry ports. On the left, you see the concentration of Latinos, and on the right is African American, and those red dots are the intermodal rail yards. So of course, right, we're highly concentrated in these areas, and of course, this stems from decades of racist housing policies, but also environmental racism. In addition to these dry ports, warehouses and distribution centers and other truck-intensive facilities locate as closely as possible because they want to be close to the ports where the goods are coming in, so they can get them out to the warehouses and the retailers and get to the consumers quickly, right? So you end up having a decentralized but a highly concentrated network of freight infrastructure that creates hubs of pollution. This is evidence as well in the health data, where we know that where communities of color are suffering from respiratory and cardiovascular issues that are associated with air pollution at higher rates than anybody else. Next slide, please. So lastly, I'll say, right, that I mean, you can see this in this map as well, right, that the non-Hispanic white population is not nearly as impacted by these dry ports, particularly within the city. And all of this is the reason why we've been emphasizing the need to include dry ports in clean port funding. Not only do we need to decarbonize our seaports, right, this is critical for our communities along our coast, like in Savannah and in Oakland, but we also need to fund the decarbonization of dry ports as well, because there are so many more of these across the country. It's also important for us to do the popular education around this issue, not only locally, but nationally. Most people that you talk to, even here, don't realize how many containers are coming through Chicago every year and how we're directly connected to global trade as a result. Chicago is the most important inland port city in North America, and therefore our approach in regulating these dry ports should be treated as such. We've been in discussions with the governor's office, and we know that the state is going to be applying for some of this funding. But like Athena said, there's only 250 million allocated for dry ports. So while we're excited about the 3 billion for the entire program, we hope that this is just a start. Hopefully the administration, Congress, the EPA can partner to increase funding for both water and dry ports in the coming years. Because these ports are literally killing our communities, and we can't afford to wait to take action. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jose. So next, I'm going to pass it to Miss Margaret from West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. Miss Margaret, do we have you on? Just give me 1 minute. Okay, well, Miss Margaret is in the chat, so she might, oh no, you're here. Okay, great. Please.
How everybody doing? This is Miss Margaret Gordon of West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. I started off as a community volunteer. Now I'm a co-director. And I tell people, I came to a meeting 25 plus years ago and I never left. And that West Oakland Environmental Indicators is a resident-led environmental justice organization that uses research and data with the advocacy of training residents to be involved in these different solutions of air, water, and soil of West Oakland. Also, our port, the Port of Oakland, has been here. Has been in operations for almost over almost 200 years, and that we know that at any given time they may have up to 10,000 truck trips a day, with just maybe a little under 13,000 trucks, and that we know that we are a community also surrounded by 3 freeways and 2 which is can have authority to drive trucks on, one does not, and that one does not is closer to where white people live at, and gotta have a mandate to not back in the 60s, but not to have trucks on that one freeway. Then we also have been doing our own air monitoring for the past 15 years with instruments and devices from various researchers. So we have a lot of our own data. And then we also have 3 fanny pack air monitors that detect 3 PM 2.5 and 10. We are also would like to see certain things from EPA and getting all this money. I would like to see that EPA provide staff observers around the issue of community engagement. Why I'm saying that? Because we as West Oakland Environmental Indicators have filed a civil rights complaint against the city of Oakland and the Port of Oakland for lack of engagement. So that should raise a red flag that you should be sending a staff person from Region 9, that's where we are, needs to be part of any community engagement process. Then also, we are also, West Oakland is surrounded by a post office distribution center. We have various truck businesses in the area. We're and actually we're so close. I live less than about a mile from the entrance and exits of the port. And between the hours of 11 and 1, trucks come to the Port of Oakland, because we do toxic tours. We do tours to look at what's happening at the port with residents and anybody else who wants to have that information. But anyway, between 11 and 1 every day from Monday to Friday, the trucks come from all over Northern California to either drop off a container or pick up a container, because the Port of Oakland is a container port. And while those trucks can't get through the gate until 1 o'clock, because the ILWU workers or the longshoreman workers get a break. The truck drivers don't have a break. So they're lined up, queued up to get inside the gates or get into the terminal. There is no enforcement people driving through at that time to tell a truck driver to turn off your engine. Under the state of California, on the streets of anytime you're on the streets, a public street in California, a truck is only idle 5 minutes. But once they get behind the gate, is know that they have exemption. So one of the things that we see that has to happen, even though they say they're going to do air monitoring as part of the community engagement, we have no idea where they're going to put these air monitors. So as part of the community engagement, we are pushing that we get to say where the monitors go if they get the grant. So that's my story, and thank you for letting me take up this time to give y'all this information about the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project in the Port of Oakland.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Margaret. We really appreciate it. So now, next slide. So I have this labeled key takeaways, but really, I just want to talk about, why it's so important to reach out to communities when planning for these types of programs. In my role as a legislative representative, I work with a lot of community organizations, but I've also, worked with port authorities and different associations that represent these groups. And a question that sometimes I'll get is, well, we want to reduce the pollution, like what is the community engagement piece that's necessary? And hoping from, hearing these speakers, you'll see that there's a wealth of knowledge from folks that are living in impacted communities. They know what they want, and they also know what they don't want. And so it's really, really important to be talking with communities when applying for programs that, really impact their lives. So just like some food for thought, if you will, I just listed a few things here just to kind of illustrate the nuances of, there's a lot of things that you can ask for, and it's really important to talk to communities about those specific things. The first one I'll mention is applying for the most polluting vehicles. And what I mean by that is, from my experience, a lot of the ports that are planning to apply are really going for like the lowest hanging fruit. And so they're planning to apply for things like cargo handling equipment, like forklifts. But we also want to emphasize that the technology is available today, and zero emission drayage trucks, locomotives, shore power is all available. Not only do they have a greater impact on reducing emissions, but another thing to think about is EPA will want to fund a lot of different types of projects. So if you're able to diversify the types of technology you're applying for, that may be really helpful for your application. Another thing I'll emphasize is prioritizing battery electric vehicles. A lot of groups prefer battery electric over hydrogen, for example, because the process used to produce hydrogen, which is steam methane reformation, or SMR, emits massive amounts of air pollution into neighboring communities. So it creates additional issues, and burning hydrogen creates health harming pollution. And many industry proposals for hydrogen involve combustion rather than fuel cells. And another thing to think about is the transportation and storage of hydrogen, for example, and how that affects communities. Another thing I'll mention that community groups have mentioned is also really important. The Clean Ports program has this as optional to include scrappage in your application. A lot of community groups that I've spoken to have emphasized that they want to include scrappage in their plans. And that's basically when you're replacing an old vehicle with a new one. And that basically ensures that older vehicles don't end up in communities that are already burdened with pollution. And then lastly, another thing to think about, especially when it comes to the planning piece, talk about what type of planning activities would be really important for your community to see. So for example, some communities, as Shakina mentioned earlier, might be interested in workforce training, and that's something that's highly requested. Andrea Vidare, who I had mentioned earlier, is a huge believer in the connection between environmental justice and worker justice. Her family has, worked at warehouses, unloading trucks and moving packages. And so it's really essential that the jobs benefit local communities as well. And just on that piece, labor standards or strong labor practices ensure that workers are benefiting from more than just access to a job, but they have access to a high quality job. So that's really important too. So these are just a couple things to think about when doing outreach to community groups. Next slide. Okay, so very quickly, what can your office do? Number one, just ensure ports in your district know about the EPA Clean Ports program. We will have an option at the end of this with a poll asking if you want to connect more on port information. And so we're happy to figure out, what eligible port or ports are in your district. So that's really important, number one. Number two, make sure applicants are talking with and informed by communities. This can be accomplished by scheduling meetings with community-based organizations and impacted residents to discuss local concerns and prioritize community-driven solutions. In addition, you can dedicate resources to analyze potential health and safety impacts associated with alternative shipping fuels, like hydrogen, invest in strong community protections for port adjacent communities. Number three, facilitate connections between local nonprofits and community groups with statutory partners for pass-through funding, especially for the piece on the types of partnerships. Again, I really recommend EPA's frequently asked questions webinar that just recently happened. And then fourth, support additional funding for clean ports. So I'll just flag a couple programs, and I think today is the deadline for approps. But some, programs that we'll flag are, for example, DOT's Port Infra Development Program, EPA's DERA program, DOT's Reduction in Truck Emissions at Port Facilities program, which are all essential. And there's other programs to know, such as DOT's Port Infrastructure Develop. Yeah, okay, I already said that. But again, there's a lot of different programs like that, and I'm sure there's some that I haven't even listed. Those are really important to continue funding, continue supporting. There's still a lot of work to be done in those sectors. We're super excited for all this funding from IIJA and IRA, and there's still a lot of work to do. Next slide. Okay, so we're about to go into Q&A if there are any questions. But first, let's go. I think is there another slide after this? Okay, just kidding. There's a poll. Okay. So there's a question on, would you like any additional information on this program? In general, we will send you a list of resources that might be really helpful, but if you reply yes, we'll give you some more specific information and reach out to you directly, and maybe connect you with some community groups that are in your district. So just wanted to give that as an option, and I'll leave that up. In the meantime, if there are any Q&A questions, feel free to add. We haven't had any. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so in case y'all are too shy to ask questions right now, I have the contacts of all the folks that were on today's webinar, including my own, if you want to reach out. I also included the link to EPA's Clean Ports program. And again, if you have any questions for EPA, the last day for questions is May 6th. And you can email them at cleanports@epa.gov. And unless there's any questions, I'll stay on for like a minute. But it looks like that's it. Thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it.